Well, welcome to the fourth seminar of the International Multimodal Communications Center for this term. I'm super excited to be able to introduce Professor Pilar Prieto, who is an ICREA research professor at the Department of Translation and Language Sciences at UPF in Barcelona. And her main research goal is to understand the role of prosody and co-speech gesture in human communication. She does this from a cross-linguistic, developmental, and cognitive perspective. I think super excited for the presentation today, which is on the benefits of prosodic embodiment for second language learning pronunciation. Super excited. We'll have 40 minutes for the talk or so. I do encourage people to turn on their cameras if you're comfortable doing that while we're recording. We're only recording the presentation and the active speaker. And I do think it's nice if speakers can actually know that they're presenting to humans and not just black squares. And yeah, we'll stop the recording after the main presentation. We'll have some time for open Q&A at the end. I will encourage you to drop questions in the chat as they occur so that we can remember them and make sure that we do bring them up in the Q&A at the end. So over to you, Pilar.
Yes, thanks a lot, Scott, for the nice presentation, and thanks to Elinor for the nice invitation. I wish I'd been here in Oxford and share with you all the projects that you have in this great center. So, well, but this time we need to be this way. So, yeah, okay, so thanks. And yeah, I want to start by just looking a little bit at this speech from ex-President Obama. And yeah, we could start noticing how he moves his hands along with his prosody. And then we can talk a little bit about the, what I'm going to do as a summary today. Okay.
The idea that if you're willing to work hard, it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from or what you look like or where you live. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white or Hispanic or Asian or Native American.
Okay. So it's nice how he moves his hands along with the most prominent syllables in his speech, right? So yeah, we've seen how he basically moves his hands along with the prominence in prosody, right? And then the idea is to use this highlighting function to really try to embody the pronunciation of a second language so that we can boost phonological learning. So that's the idea of all the present, the experiments that we'll present today. Will be like a brief summary. So, well, we know that prosody is a central and structural component of language phonology, and that, as we've seen, right, prosodic and gestural features of language are really tightly interconnected, both from a pragmatic and a temporal perspective. So, the goal, as I said, would be to assess the value of using body movements mimicking prosody, so that is melody and rhythm features, for second language pronunciation learning. And we'll see how, the results from our lab really look like so positive in this regard. So I'd like to show you these, right? So the first experiment is on producing big gestures in this course. How if we encourage students to do this, we can get some benefits in L2 pronunciation after training. Then we'll see how, also hand clapping to the rhythm of target words in a second language can facilitate L2 pronunciation of these words in Catalan learners of French and also Chinese learners of French. Then we'll go a step ahead. We've talked about rhythm, and then we're going to move to melodic training. So we'll see how movements of our hands that mimic pitch can actually also bootstrap L2 pronunciation. I'll show you two experiments on this. And then finally, I'd like to show you some really nice results that we just got on just embodied musical trainings that involve no speech on actually facilitating L2 pronunciation. So this is really a transfer effect from embodied music training. Okay, so the idea is that different types of embodied prosodic trainings help boost this acquisition of both L2 segmental and suprasegmental features, not just suprasegmental features. And I'll try to show evidence of these, right? That also the suprasegmental training affecting the segments, right? Okay, so this is joint work, this very nice team, and we have worked on these for a long time now, like 5-6 years. And I see that Florence is here. She's a flow, so she's like a central piece of all this work. And yeah, Peng and Florence and Olga have graduated already. And then Yuan is right now finishing his dissertation. And then on the bottom, we see our external collaboration on all these experiments. Okay, so well, let's start, right? So gestures, we know, right, that they're tightly intertwined with the speech and time and semantic function. And this has been something that has been really reported across languages, that prominence in a speech goes with prominence in gesture. And we'll see some evidence of this. We know that gestures are anchored to prosodic structure, not only from a prominence point of view, but also from a phrasing point of view, looking at really the actual prosodic phrases that act as really anchors of gestures. So on the one hand, as we've seen, right, the most prominent part of gestures tends to occur with the most prominent part of a speech, and that it have pervasive evidence of these across different language types. And also we know that prosodic phrases are key in that gestures tend to start and end with beginnings and ends of prosodic phrases. So I normally end the prosodic phrase together with my, so I return to my like baseline position in my gesture. Okay, so I'd like to just show you briefly some results that we obtained some years ago now with Nuria. And that we basically run like a pointing corrective focus task in which participants had to point to a target image and correct the person that just stated something. And then we analyzed the pointing gesture, right? The basic, temporal realization of the pointing gesture. And we saw that actually the apex of the pointing gesture, as we see it here, is really quite aligned with the peak of the rising pitch accent in the contrastive focus El Pascal star pitch accent, right? So we were really amazed at this because you know that the actual peak moves depending on the actual prosodic pattern of the actual word, right? So if we have, for example, an iambic word, this peak will be moved backwards because you need space for the L tone to realize at the end of the word, right? So actually the peak, the apex of the gesture was moving together with the peak of the pitch accent. That was quite a nice finding because it meant that, okay, apexes of pointings go not only with the actual peak in prominence, but also they are, these realizations are really mediated by prosodic phrasing. Okay, so just looking at another gesture type, which are these beat gestures that we'll talk about today a lot. And this is one type. Beat gestures are probably the gestures that we use most when we speak. And as you can see, right, the movement down of this beat gesture is really aligned with the low plus high star of the actual speech, right? And this is what we could hear in Obama's speech, right? A lot of movements going with pitch accentuation. Okay, so the idea, given this strong alignment, right, between gesture movements and pitch movements or prosodic movements, we'd like to use this prosodic highlighting function of gesture and specifically of beat gesture to try to improve second language pronunciation, right? So in a way, we want to see whether this embodiment is really facilitating, speech, right? So in a way, we're looking for a transfer effect here too, right? Okay, so we know that from previous evidence that rhythmic priming, so like showing rhythm sentences, before pronouncing something in a second language, for example. And also prosodic trainings are beneficial for phonological processing and phonological production, as well as reading skills. And there is a lot of evidence for this. But less is known about, the embodiment of these prosodic trainings and whether this represents like an extra effect, right? An extra boost in this trying to improve second language pronunciation learning, right? So that's the idea of these experiments that I will show today, right? So we're base ourselves in the embodied cognition paradigm that basically claims that sensory and motor information provides enhanced and richer versions of conceptual representations in different areas. And we want to basically apply this to phonological learning, right? Because the embodied cognition paradigm has been applied to other areas, and like to see whether these effects of embodiment also apply to phonological learning and basically help create like more complex and more accurate representations of phonology by using embodiment, right? So that's the idea. Just revising a little bit because there have been many studies on the use of hand gestures to improve several, areas of second language phonology. Like some articulatory gestures have been used, like mimicking specific articulatory features of target segments. Also some durational features, like marking the duration length, like for example, to acquire vowel durational contrast. Also the famous pitch gestures that we're going to use also, but in the wider context, like pitch gestures have been used to acquire like basic tonal contrast, so basically pitch movements really centered around the syllable. But now we're going to use them for the whole sentence and discourse. And then also beat gestures, right? So we're going to take on this beat gesture idea, because we really believe that beat gestures are really emphasizing the different rhythmic patterns in speech. They allow you to really see like the discourse level prosodic patterns. So that's why we're going to use them more, right? So we're going to use these different gesture. I mean, these studies have they have like incongruent results, but generally, I mean, if you look, basically, yes, Florence is preparing a systematic review on this, and what we're seeing is that generally, I mean, if you take all the studies that have been published together, you see that positive effects of using gestures for the different areas. But we also believe that if you tackle more like a prosody level, not so much the segmental level, you obtain like more clear results. So that's why we're focusing more on prosodic embodiment. Okay, so the idea is then, what about these embodied trainings if we use this phrase level prosodic structure to boost pronunciation learning? What do we obtain, right? Is it more clear that we can obtain results on actually obtaining better and more accurate patterns of L2 pronunciation? So we, as we've said, right, we have hypothesized that these embodied trainings that highlight phrase level prosody, either the rhythm or the melody, can act as scaffolding mechanisms for the acquisition of L2 speech. Okay. So we're going to center ourselves first on beat gestures, and we know that beat gestures are really very common gestures that are typically used for, with various functions, and one of them is rhythmic marking, but most often focus marking and discourse structure marking. And there are many studies also on the pragmatic uses of beat gestures. So does training with beat gestures help in pronunciation learning? We want to ask the following question in this study, in the first experiment. In basically, the question is phonetic training better if it can involve production of beat gestures, that is, encouraging students to produce with beat gestures versus just observation of beat gestures. And this is what we did in this study together with Olga and Carmela. Okay, and here the idea was to try to help Catalan learners of English. And we know that Catalan has a very different rhythm from English in that, for example, just looking at the two, you know, like the typical rhythmic systems, English is in the stress timed, you know, box, and Catalan and Spanish are in the syllable timed box. And Eleanor knows a lot about this, right? We did this work together on comparing the timings of Catalan English and Spanish, right? And then also from a higher level perspective, also we have a very different ways of marking a phrasal prominence, not just the basic rhythmic type. So based on this, the actual research question was, will a 15-minute short training encouraging Catalan learners of English to produce beat gestures in English discourse have a positive effect on L2 pronunciation? So that was the actual procedure that we used, basically a pre-test with 10 discourse prompts that we obtained from a set of contextual items that you would get usually in a, you know, in a second language setting. And then a training phase that was a between subject organization. And this was a training with beat gesture observation and another training with just beat gesture production. And then at post-test, you had exactly the same test, just seeing, okay, how much did they improve, right? By doing just observation or production. Okay, so that was an example of pre and post-test prompt. Like the students will read this, and then, you know, at the second, you know, the second slide will ask them to basically record themselves. It's basically, it's like a discourse completion task, right? I mean, you set up a context and they need to actually utter the response, the reaction. And okay, after obtaining these, you know, reactions from students to these prompts, we basically had these accentedness ratings from 5 native speakers to saying how accented would the actual reaction, you know, attain, right? So like, okay, how would you rate nativeness or accentedness in that speech? Okay, and that is the actual video that they would hear for training. So they would hear a native speaker basically asking several questions using like typical situations also in L2, but basically using beat gestures, so that we were really highlighting rhythm, right?
Sorry, what did the professor just say? I couldn't hear him.
Okay, so here we are grouping syllables according to like prominence levels, right? So in the end, like the most prominent syllable is the one that gets the beat, right? And the gesture observation group just basically watched the native speaker just produce all these items, and the gesture production group basically repeated the sentences, producing not just speech, but also gesture. And the duration of this training was 15 minutes. So what are the results? Basically, in here you see that the pre-test levels, right, and the post-test levels in the second pair of columns, and it goes, the level goes down, but this is very good because we're talking about accentedness. So we're looking at less accented speech at post-test, right? But it is nice that also in the beat production group, you get a significant difference between, you know, the beat observation group and the beat production group, right? And that's what we were looking for. Unfortunately, I mean, not trained items were not affected. So you see that they're as accented as the, you know, as they were in the pre-test. And this is the last 2 pair of columns, right? Okay, so that's what we're looking for. So the conclusions here that a short training encouraging learners to produce beat gestures in this course tends to improve pronunciation ratings of trained items at post-test. Okay, so that was for experiment 1. Now, let's move to another type of rhythmic training, which is not using actual natural gestures, but more like kinesthetic movements, or in this case, like clapping, which is a natural thing that you can do, right, to actually mimic rhythm in speech. And this is done by children a lot, right, in primary school. It's an embodied activity focused on rhythm and is easily adaptable for children and young students. And also triggers positive emotions, so that we know that these movements are likable, right? And it's nice that because they can do that also in groups in the classroom, right? So these are studies 2 and 3, and they have the same structure. So they made the same experimental design, but they apply to 2 different populations, and we'll see why. Okay, and the results are similar and a little bit different, so it's interesting to look at them. Okay, so the question was, can a rhythmic activity like mimicking rhythm of new words that you are learning, right, help Catalan children and Chinese teenagers improve their pronunciation of new words in French? And these rhythmic activities basically clapping to these new words that you are learning. So we know that in French, primary stress is word final. That's a systematic, like an edge final language. And it's realized by a pervasive vocalic lengthening. And you can hear in here, like, and also see, right? Like the confiture, yeah. Confiture, I don't know how you pronounce now in English. Confiture, right? The stress would be in the first one, right? Okay, so the spoken by a native French speaker would be something like this.
Confiture.
Okay, so very long U at the end, right? And you can see how the imitation by a Chinese speaker, basically, actually this recording seems like it is being cut out, but it's not. So it's basically the actual pronunciation by the speaker. You can listen to that.
Confiture.
It's basically confiture, something quite short, and it even looks like you have some kind of a glottal stop at the end, right? Okay, so that's what we want to improve, right? At least the prosodic part, and also, if possible, also the segmental part, right? Okay, so that's what we're targeting, as we will see. Okay, so these will be 2 experiments with naive learners. So they are basically children and teenagers who have not heard any word in French before, presumably, and they are just asked to participate in a word learning task, right? And some will do this with hand clapping and some with no hand clapping, and we'll see the effects of hand clapping on their pronunciation after training. So this experiment, the first one, this is experiment 2 in here. It's with Catalan children, 30 children from a primary school in Girona, and Catalan is a first language. Interestingly, and this is an effect that we want to comment on, here we chose words that are cognates with Catalan, and this is it's relatively easy because it's a Romance language. So in this case, learners do not have to worry about learning a new target item, right? Because more or less, it is phonologically very, very similar to what it is in their language. But it is more or less the same lexically, but phonologically, it is quite different, right? Now, for experiment 3, we have 50 adolescents from a middle school in China. And indeed, here we have non-cognate words, not cognate target words. So we have the opportunity to look at this degree of difficulty. So it's much harder for Chinese adolescents to learn these words because they also need to learn a new lexical item, right? Whereas for the Catalan children, this is not the case. Okay, so the target words, if you know some French and Catalan, you can see that these are cognates, right? Balcon, tambour, musique, purée, right? But not for Chinese adolescents. And that's a key difference here. So the procedure, as you will see, is quite the same for all these training experiments. So you start always with a pre-test. Sometimes you create your groups depending on some individual variables, right? And that's why here we separated them before pre-test. And So we have the same structure, pre-test, training, which is in here, either in a clapping condition or non-clapping condition, and post-test, which is normally the same tests that are repeated, and then you can see the, the gains in the two groups, right, across the two groups, and you're looking for this interaction. Okay, so we got this audiovisual training with basically 20 French words in the two groups. And let's see an example with the clapping condition. You'll see Florence here.
Pizza. Pizza.
And then we would ask them, okay, now please repeat and clap your hands. Elephant.
Elephant. Elephant.
Okay, so that was the same, right? And the instruction to basically repeat and clap the hands, right? Okay. Okay, so let's see, what students were doing. This is an example of a Chinese adolescent with these target French words. They were quite good at getting the final stress, right? You can hear the clap at the end, right? There was okay. So let's see the results. Okay, let's look at the experiment one, which was on cognates, so the Catalan children. You see that the no clapping condition, right? Basically, if you look at the pre-test and post-test, which is the first column, right, and on the left, basically there's no significant difference, right? The significant difference, I've marked it here on the right, which is for the clapping group. And there in the first one, you see basically no gains when you are just training with speech. Basically, when you train with clapping, you are made more aware of these differences, and then you produce less accented speech at post-test, which is what we were looking at, right? Okay, so for experiment 3, which is the one with Chinese adolescents, even though I've marked it in here, this is wrong. So there was no interactions, basically no gains in the clapping and no clapping groups, right? So this was kind of surprising for us. We thought, it would be have been nice to obtain these results. So that's why we decided to go on and look at the acoustic effects to see also if the students in the Chinese group, right, in experiment 3, were also getting some gains on syllable lengthening, but they were not really, perceived by raters in the accentedness ratings, right? So that's what we did. And the acoustic results showed that in the clapping group, you obtain this difference in lengthening, right? From pre-test to post-test, you obtain a longer syllable. And it is nice how also the Chinese students do the same, even though then you can see a change in the acoustics that doesn't get, right, an effect on the actual perception of the raters, the native raters, right? But the effect is there, even though it is less, right? And it might be that we're asking why this effect is not so strong for Chinese learners, and this is probably the cognate effect, right? You need to learn, apart from the pronunciation, also the target word, right? So the conclusions from these two experiments basically are that producing beat gestures and hand clapping to the rhythmic structure of the target language can help improve L2 pronunciation. And that relatively short, talking about short embodied trainings, because look, if you take an HVPT training with segmental high variability phonetic training with segmental contrast, sometimes it takes hours and hours and hours, and you have just a post-test, an immediate post-test, and you don't get such nice results. So I think that this is quite nice that we can obtain with relatively short sessions such a nice gain, or at least you show that they are really making it is really making a difference in the awareness, the phonological awareness, right, that you can see at the immediate post-test. Okay, so let's go into the second part of the talk. So what about the effects of training other sentence level prosodic features like melody. We've looked at, sorry, let me just turn on the light or something, just a second. Sorry, it is getting dark. I don't think you were actually
That's all
seeing
right.
me. So, okay,
We can see you clearly.
Okay, now, so let's look at melody, right? What happens if we imitate melody at the sentence level? Can we bootstrap pronunciation, right? That's the idea. Do these trainings also have positive effects on the learning of segmental features, not just suprasegmental features? So we'll look into this in these two experiments that are coming up. So experiments 4 and 5 are about melodic embodied trainings. And basically the question is whether they can improve L2 pronunciation. And these are two experiments that are quite related to each other, as you will see. So we know that embodied melodic trainings work at the syllable or at the local level, right? So because, you know, previous studies have looked more at the acquisition of L2 tone or L2 intonation, but basically focusing on the last part of the intonational contours, so nuclear pitch contours. So we know that focusing on these syllable movements, right, so like tonal movements of target syllables, it tends to really make a difference. And actually, I mean, if you go around YouTube and check how Chinese speakers tell or try to train people to actually pronounce Chinese tones, most of them use their hands. So that's quite something. I think they're really adapting. You know, they know that this is working, right? And you know, I've made this exercise of going through, you know, some instructors that are in YouTube, and it's quite systematic. Okay, so but what happens if we do this at the phrase level? Now focusing more on intonation. So something like this, right? Just un peu mal au cœur, right? Something like going up with the melody and then going down. And in this case, this is French. And we call this a prosodic hand gesture. So basically imitating the melody of the target sentence. So we have two training experiments that mimic DISCOURSE, and we try now to really have longer training sessions, you will see. And because I think that in this way we can be more effective, right? And we want to integrate these also into a DISCOURSE training strategy, not so much understand this as a phonetic training, but also being part of a pragmatic discourse, right? I mean, that's at least what we tried for these trainings. Okay, so experiment 4 is about assessing the effect of what we call embodied logatomes, and logatomes are just a list of nonsense syllables like da, 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 da. I mean, it has been claimed that, you know, focusing on the prosodic features of language without, you know, the segmental part, you can basically, you know, get a lot out of these because you get actually the prosody just highlighted, right? Da, 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 right? So it looks like you focus more on prosody. So we wanted to look at the effects of logatomes and the effects of embodied L2 speech, but basically embodying melody. Okay, and these are always with Catalan learners of French, and they're intermediate level learners of French. So we were looking at how they can improve their pronunciation level by, you know, really, you know, participating in these trainings. So longer trainings, 3 sessions of 40 minutes or something like this, and assessment of now suprasegmental and segmental L2 accuracy. So we'll want to look at the effects of suprasegmental training on segmental. And I think we have very nice evidence of these, you'll see. Okay, so how were the trainings in these? So for experiment 4 on embodied logatomes, this is the non-embodied speech group. And they would just...
Mais le facteur n'est pas rentré de cette tournée.
Okay.
Mais le facteur n'est pas rentré de cette tournée.
Okay, so they basically see first like a nice interaction between, yeah, between speakers of French, and let's see if I can show you what they see first. It's like they see first like an interaction.
Hey, salut Lucie. Salut Muriel, mais chut, tu parles pas si fort. Tu es folle. Où vas-tu? Faire un tour dans la rue.
Well, just basically the idea to contextualize the learning into, so it's not just repetition of sentences, but they are embedded more into a discourse learning, right? So you're just emphasizing some parts of these exchanges. So that's the idea. Okay, so what happens with the embodied logatome in experiment 4?
Da 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 da.
Okay, so that's what they see.
Mais le facteur n'est pas.
So they hear basically the logatome together with the melodic movement. In experiment 5, it's a little bit different, and then we don't work with logatomes, but rather with speech, right? That's the not embodied speech.
Juste un peu mal au cœur.
Yeah, so they basically have to repeat the speech, and here they have to.
Juste un peu mal au cœur.
Okay, so here they basically see the actual movements with speech. So the main difference is basically you either embody logatomes, you embody speech. Okay, so this was the structure, so very similar to what you have seen before. So the pre-test was more like a dialogue reading in French, and then also sentence imitation in French. And then you have your 30-minute discourse training sessions. So watching first the short play, reading the scripts of the play, training sentence by sentence is what you have seen, watching the short play again, and reading the scripts of the play again. So it's like more a contextualized pronunciation training, which is something that many phonetic trainings don't do, and we think that this is important. Okay, and here it's nice because in this experiment we incorporated the delayed post-test, which is something that you can see in this week, the week after. So the post-test is a week after the training, and then the delayed post-test 2 weeks after the training. Okay. You've seen these. Let me just. Okay, so let's look at the pronunciation measures that we took, because these are more complete than the ones you saw before. So both at pre and post test, we had for experiment 4 a discourse reading task. For experiment 5, we had a sentence imitation task and a dialogue reading task. And the measures were like more complete, right? You have an accentedness report, right? Comprehensibility report, fluency report, segmental accuracy, suprasegmental accuracy. That's the common type of perceptual measures that you get typically, right, in assessing L2 speech. In experiment 5, it is nice because we go one step further and we assess, on the one hand, perceptual items like accentedness, comprehensibility, and fluency, but then we go on and look at acoustic measures of a set of vowels that the Catalan students do not have in the Catalan inventory, which are U, E, and E, right? The rounded front vowels. And we're going to check whether, the actually embodied group, it gets better in these target vowels. And this way we can show that actually prosodic training transfers into segmental gain, right? Okay, so let's look at quickly at I don't know how I'm doing with time because you need more or less. Okay.
I think you're fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we look at global pronunciation measures, accentedness, right? You look at the difference between speech only, non-embodied logatomes, and embodied logatomes, and you see that it is basically the embodied logatomes that get the difference. So basically, we do not find corroboration of the hypothesis that logatomes can be so nice for pronunciation learning. So just isolating prosody without having the speech. Rather, the embodied logatomes is that they get the gain, right, with embodiment. Also, if you look at suprasegmental features, when raters were looking more at, okay, let's try to assess whether suprasegmentals were better. Also, you see a nice effect for the embodied logotomes at the end, right here. So for experiment 5, that's the results we got for experiment 4. Now for experiment 5, we look at accentedness, and again, right, you see how the gesture condition gets higher, right, for the post-test. It's higher at the post-test and higher at the delayed post-test, right, and in comparison to the no gesture group. For the sentence imitation task, it is the same thing, right? So you get an effect, you know, for the gesture group, a comparison to the no gesture group. Now, looking at the effects on the acoustics, right? We're going to look at F2 because we're interested in looking at whether Catalan speakers attain the roundedness in these vowels, right? And we are looking at higher, you know, F2 values. We're really targeting higher F2 values, and we had the hypothesis that we will attain higher F2 values in the gesture condition, right? And this is what we got. Let me show you quickly. Okay, for the vowel E, U, right? For the non-embodied group, you basically see no difference. You get a mean higher F2, right, in the post-test and in the delayed post-test in comparison to the pre-test, right? And the vowel the same thing, right? So you see this effect on the embodied group, like getting these higher levels of F2, so getting more front, right? And again, for the vowel right? So basically in the dialogue reading task, and this was the reading task, and then we had the dialogue reading task, and here is the same thing, and the same thing, and more or less the same thing. Well, sometimes we don't obtain effects of delayed post-test, so these are, you know, the models are different, but the tendency is very, very clear, right? When you see very, you know, findings that are not really boosted in the non-embodied condition, you see that they get nice, right? Nice segment, like more segmental accuracy for the front rounded vowels in the embodied condition, right? So the summary of the effects by comparing the two studies, we see that for global pronunciation measures, both studies show a significant improvement in accentedness in the embodied condition, in the embodied conditions in both dialogue and sentence imitation tasks, but we get no effects on comprehensibility and fluency. Perhaps we'll need longer trainings, etc. Right? Then looking at segmental and suprasegmental accuracy, experiment 4 showed the beneficial effect of embodied prosodic trainings on suprasegmental accuracy and not on segmental accuracy. This is experiment 4. But when we look at experiment 5 and do acoustic analysis, then we see that embodied trainings trigger higher F2 values on the front rounded vowels. That is not more, they are more target-like. And also, we haven't seen this, but generally the training effects are maintained at delayed post-test. And that's quite nice because this is basically 2 weeks after training, right? Okay, so this is a summary of the melodic trainings. Now, I like to show you these very nice results that we got lately. And this is, you know, basically looking at it. We looked at the embodied prosodic based trainings up until now. So basically looking at rhythmic trainings and melodic trainings. But now we ask, okay, what about if we get direct transfer effect from a 3-session embodied music training? That is with no speech at all, right? Just basically doing like a Dalcroze based music training approach, which is actually used a lot for music education. Do we get with these sessions a more accurate L2 speech production skills, or in general speech production skills through a language imitation task? So that's what we're going to do in this experiment that we presented this year, New Sounds. And the main question was, will 3-session Dalcroze-based musical training with basically involving no foreign speech input, enhance, can this training enhance foreign language pronunciation skills? So I like to show you how a DISCOURSE-based musical training looks like. And it was nice how, you know, we spent a lot of time with Joanne and Florence designing these 3 sessions, like full of activities that would basically boost through the body all the, you know, different musical concepts, right? So, for example, here, a possible you know, activity that you can use in the DISCOURSE-based musical training would be something like this. Okay, so basically you're moving to the beat and have to touch the balloon in the moment you hear the beat, right? So it's like a, in a way, it's like a beat gesture, but involving all the body and no speech, right? Here's a more complex activity about more like body percussion to more complex body movements, you'll see. Okay, so you've basically we put together these really nice DISCOURSE sessions, right, for Chinese students in this case, right? And what we did was like the same structure, 3 DISCOURSE sessions in the middle, pre and post test, right? And here for the pre and post, we had 2 tasks. And basically we had a multi-language imitation task with 6 unfamiliar languages, 2 short sentences in each language. And then a sentence reading task, reading 3 short English sentences because they were actually English students, basically low intermediate level of English. Okay, so let's see the results of what happened. And it is really nice to see that we obtained systematically results in every measure that we got. Like the multi-language imitation task was assessed by 2 raters in each language, so 12 raters, and they actually assessed accentedness of the target sentence, comparing the actual, you know, pronunciation of the student with the actual baseline pronunciation. And what you can see is that the language imitation task was done much better, basically 0.8 points better at post-test after the DISCOURSE-based music, embodied music training, right? So now looking at the sentence reading task, we have these sentences that were read by the Chinese students. We have these nice results on accentedness again, right? Also in comprehensibility, right? You see that how the non-embodied music group was basically, in this case, it was basically, the music lessons that they normally do in school. So like treatment as usual, right? So you have these accentedness results, these comprehensibility results, then also segmental accuracy was better for the embodied music group, suprasegmental accuracy. So it's nice because you can see that both segmental and suprasegmentals were better, not just, the suprasegmental direct transfer, right? And fluency, also the same thing, right? So in a way, the results of these were that in the multi-language imitation task, the music embodied group attained significant gains in the only measure that we got, which is basically, nativeness, which is accentedness at post-test. And in the sentence reading task, they obtained significant gains in terms of all the measures that were basically recorded. So the final conclusions for all these experiments are that, okay, so we think that embodied prosodic trainings, right, and not only this, but also purely music trainings, can act as scaffolding mechanisms for L2 speech production, right? Because not only you are getting better in your L2, but also in language imitation tasks, right? In this multi-language imitation task. And we have also evidence in some of the experiments showing that they support both suprasegmental, but not only these, but also segmental features, right? So that this is nice because it's pronunciation understood as a whole. And the idea is that this represents supporting evidence of what we've talked about at the beginning for the coupling. So more like what the proposal about the spatio-temporal coupling between speech and manual motor actions, right? So that we see a lot of evidence about this on infant development, right? When they start developing, you know, together, like hand motor actions together with the speech. It's like a phase during the first year that is very strong. Then also evidence from repetitive tapping and speaking tasks, speech processing, etc. So now going more into an applied area, we think that both discourse natural beat gestures and prosodic and music-based kinesthetic movements support phonological learning in relation to the embodied cognition paradigm. And in a way, we need to integrate more multimodality in more full terms, right, into a communicative interaction in the classroom. And ideally, we'd like to find a nice way to integrate it in the classroom. And just I want to mention one training that we're conducting with preschool children. And this is basically even longer training, a 1-month multimodal narrative intervention. And it is a bilingual preschool classroom. And then we are looking at a really narrative training introduced in the classroom. And we're looking at the potential effects of narrative and phonological skills in the non-dominant language. It's like an L2 kind of for these children. In this case, it's like a suburb of Barcelona in which children basically speak 80% Spanish rather than Catalan. So it's like basically non-dominant language. And we hope that with this multimodal training involving narratives, they can boost not only phonological skills, but also narrative skills, right? And percentage of use. Okay, so I think that's all.